I have always felt like I was being watched. Not in a frightening way, not the kind of watch that makes you want to look over your shoulder and run, more like the kind of watch that happens when someone cares very much where you are and whether you are safe. A presence, warm and quiet, and always just at the edge of my awareness. I mentioned it to my mother once when I was small. She said I had an overactive imagination. I mentioned it to a friend in school when I was 15. She said I was being dramatic. I stopped mentioning it after that. I filed it away with the other things I noticed that nobody else seemed to notice, and I got on with my life. My name is Mara. I am 23 years old. I have pale skin and red hair and gray eyes, and I work at a small pottery studio in the city, and I live alone in a flat above a bakery, and my life is ordinary, and I have always been fine with that. I was at the market on a Saturday in early autumn when I first saw him. I almost walked past him. He was standing at the edge of the market near the old stone archway that led to the river path, standing very still in the way that very few people stand still, not waiting restlessly, not checking a phone, just standing, present in the space in a way that was different from how most people occupied space, as if he had always been there and always would be. He had fair skin and white hair worn loose past his shoulders and blue eyes that were looking directly at me. Not at the market, not at the crowd, at me, specifically and entirely at me. I looked away, I looked back. He was still looking. His expression was not threatening. It was not the look of someone trying to get my attention. It was the look of someone seeing something they have been looking for a very long time and are trying to believe they have actually found it. It was the most unsettling and the most familiar thing I had ever seen on a stranger's face. I went home. I told myself I had imagined the familiarity, that I had simply made eye contact with a stranger and assigned meaning to it the way people sometimes did. I almost believed that. Almost. I saw him again the next day. Outside the pottery studio in the morning, standing on the opposite side of the street, not staring this time, just there, present. When I looked up, he did not look away, and he did not look embarrassed, and he did not pretend he had not been looking. He simply held my gaze for a moment and then looked away first. I went inside and told myself it was coincidence. I saw him the day after that outside the bakery below my flat, and the day after that near the river path I walked on my lunch break, and the day after that at the library 2 streets from my work. He was never close, always at a distance, always at the edge of wherever I was, never approaching, never threatening, just there. Present the way that feeling had always been present, the warm, quiet, watchful feeling I had carried my whole life. I started paying attention to the distance he kept. It was always exactly the same, far enough that I was not uncomfortable, close enough that he would see anything that came toward me before it reached me. That was a very specific distance. That was the distance of someone standing guard. On the 5th day, I stopped walking and turned around and looked at him directly. He was standing 30 feet behind me on the river path, white hair in the wind off the water, blue eyes watching me. When I turned, he went very still, the way things go still when they have been caught doing something they were not sure they were allowed to do. I walked toward him. He did not run, he did not look away. He watched me come toward him with an expression that I could not name. It was not fear and it was not guilt. It was something much older than either. Something that looked like the specific expression of someone who has been waiting a very long time for a particular moment and cannot quite believe it has arrived. I stopped a few feet from him. I looked at him properly for the first time. He was tall. His ears, I realized, were slightly pointed at the tips. His eyes were the blue of deep water, not the bright blue of sky. His face had a quality I did not have a word for. Not young, but also not old. Ageless in a way that had nothing to do with skincare. I did not know what to say. I had walked toward him with a great deal of intention and no actual plan. He said my name. Not hello, not excuse me. My name. Quietly, carefully, the way you say the name of something you have been holding in your mind for a very long time. I had never seen him before the market. I was certain of that. He spoke my name like he had been saying it for centuries. We sat on a bench by the river, and he told me. Not everything at once. He was careful with it, the way you are careful with something that could break if you drop it all at once. He gave it to me in pieces, watching my face between each piece to see how much I could hold. He told me his name was Eiran, that he was an elf, that elves were real and had been real for as long as the world had been real, that most of them lived in places humans did not go anymore, that he had not lived in those places for a very long time. He told me that 400 years ago he had been given a a human soul, one specific human, born into a family under an old oath that bound an elf warrior to their line as guardian until the line ended. He had been that guardian. He had taken the charge seriously the way he took everything seriously. He told me the first woman he guarded had been a scholar. She had red hair and gray eyes. She had died at 63, surrounded by her family, and he had stood at the back of the room and watched her go and then gone on. Her daughter had been born 20 years later. Red hair, gray eyes. He had found her and begun again. And so it had continued, 400 years, generation after generation. The same soul, he said, wearing different faces that were always somehow the same face. Red hair, gray eyes, the specific quality of attention that looked at the world like it was worth understanding. He had guarded all of them. He had watched all of them live and die. He had stood at the edges of their lives and kept the dangerous things away, and had never once introduced himself, because the oath did not require it, and introducing himself had always seemed like something he had no right to do. And then he had come to the market on a Saturday in early autumn and seen me and known immediately, the way he always knew, something in him that recognized something in me that had nothing to do with faces or hair or eyes. He had known I was the next one. I sat on the bench by the river and listened to all of it and looked at the water and thought about a presence that had always been just at the edge of my awareness, warm and quiet and watchful. I thought about 400 years of someone standing at the back of the room. I thought about the fact that I had always felt watched and had always felt safe. I did not say anything for a long time. He waited. He was very good at waiting. Then I asked him the question that had been forming since the second piece. I asked him which of them he had loved. He went very still. He said all of them. He said it simply and honestly the way he said everything. He had loved all of them the way you love the people you are responsible for, the way you love things you have spent centuries keeping safe. I asked him if that was the only way. He looked at the river for a long time before he answered. He said it had always been the only way he had allowed himself. I heard what was in that. I did not run. I did not call anyone. I did not spend the next week telling myself it had not happened. I had spent my whole life noticing things that nobody else seemed to notice, a presence at the edge of my awareness that everyone told me was imagination, the feeling of being watched that never frightened me, the specific quality of safety that seemed to follow me through every difficult thing my life had put in my path. I believed him immediately and completely, not because I was naive, because everything he said explained things I had been carrying my whole life without explanation. We met by the river the next day, and the day after that. He was not what I had expected. I had expected someone solemn and formal and ancient in a way that was hard to connect to. He was solemn sometimes. He took things seriously always. But he was also curious and specific and occasionally quietly funny in the way of someone who had been watching humans for 4 centuries and found them consistently interesting. He asked me questions, not the questions people usually asked. Not what do you do and where are you from. He asked me what I found difficult, what I was afraid of, what I was trying to build. He asked these things the way someone asks when they genuinely want to know and have nowhere to be and all the time in the world. I told him things I did not usually tell people, about the pottery, about why I had chosen it, about the specific satisfaction of making something with my hands that had not existed before, about being alone in the flat above the bakery and finding it mostly enough and sometimes not. He listened the way he did everything, completely, without dividing his attention. I asked him questions back, about the others, about 400 years of watching lives he was not quite part of. He told me carefully. The scholar who had argued with everyone she met and been right more often than not. The farmer's daughter who had grown into a healer and spent her life traveling to places that needed her. The merchant who had run her business with a precision that still made him smile to think about. The teacher, the weaver, the woman who had gone to sea. Each one distinct, each one the same soul wearing a different life. I thought about what it meant to be the latest in that line, to be carrying something that had been carried by all of them, something I could not remember but that he had watched for 4 centuries. I thought about what it meant that he had loved all of them and had never allowed himself to call it anything more than what the oath required. I thought about this more than I thought about most things. I asked him one afternoon what he had given up. We were sitting in the pottery studio after closing. He had started coming inside with me rather than standing at the edge of wherever I was. The shift had happened gradually and without announcement. One day he was outside, The next day he was inside. Neither of us made anything of it. He looked at the clay on the wheel for a moment before he answered. He said he had given up being known. That was the word he chose. Not belonging or connection or love. Known, 400 years of being present and always at a slight remove. Always the guardian. Never the person in the room who someone was glad to see for their own sake rather than for what they provided. He said that each woman he had guarded had sensed him sometimes, the way I had sensed him my whole life, a presence, a warmth, but none of them had ever walked toward him the way I had on the river path. None of them had ever sat on a bench with him and asked which of them he had loved. None of them had ever asked what he had given up. I watched his face while he said all of this. He was not asking for sympathy. He did not seem to know how to ask for things. He was just telling me the truth because I had asked, and he had decided that I deserved honest answers. I thought about 400 years of being present and unseen, of caring enormously for people who were glad of the warmth but did not know its source, of standing at the back of every room for century after century. I thought about the fact that he had done all of this willingly, that he had considered it his responsibility and his honor, and had not once in 400 years decided it was too much. I reached across and put my hand on his. His skin was cool the way very old things are cool, not cold, just not warm in the human way. He looked at my hand on his for a long time. Then he turned his hand over and held mine. Neither of us said anything about it. We did not need to. Something found me in November. I did not know what it was. I still do not have a word for it that means anything. Eiran told me later that there were things in the world that were drawn to certain kinds of souls. Old things. The kind that existed before most of what humans thought of as history. The kind that had no interest in humans generally but occasional interest in specific ones for reasons that had nothing to do with kindness. I felt it first as a change in the quality of the air, a heaviness, a wrongness, the way a room feels when something has been in it that should not have been. I was walking home from the studio on a Wednesday evening. The street was not empty, but it felt empty. The people who should have been there were there, but somehow not registering, as if I was slightly outside the normal version of the world. I stopped walking, every instinct I had said stop. Eiran was there before I had finished stopping. He did not come from the direction I expected. He simply appeared between me and the wrongness, the way he had always simply appeared between me and anything that came toward me. 400 years of practice. The specific economy of movement of something that has done this so many times it has become instinct. What happened next I could not follow completely. It was fast and strange and involved things I did not have a framework for. It was over in less than 2 minutes. The wrongness was gone. The street returned to itself. People walked past as if nothing had happened because for them nothing had. He turned around and looked at me. His blue eyes were very focused and checking me the same way he always checked me after something came near, the same way he had been checking me through 7 generations without me knowing. I was fine. I was always fine. That was what having him there had always meant. I looked at him standing in the street and thought about 400 years of this, of him stepping between people he loved and things that came for them, of doing it quietly and completely, and then going back to the edge of their lives without being thanked because they had not known there was anything to thank him for. I thanked him. Out loud, directly, for all of it, not just this evening but all of it, every time he had been there without me knowing, every version of me he had kept safe, every century of standing at the back of the room. He looked at me for a long time. Something moved across his face that I had not seen there before, something that had been kept very carefully in check for a very long time. He said it was his honor. The way he said it, I understood it meant something more than the formal words. I understood it meant that it had been his honor and his grief and his reason and his loss and his only constant for 400 years. I stepped forward and put my arms around him. He went very still for a moment. Then he held me back, carefully, the way you hold something you have been afraid to hold too tightly for 400 years. I started dreaming differently after November. Not nightmares, not strange dreams in the way that strange usually means frightening, strange in the way that felt more like memory than imagination, specific and detailed in a way that dreams usually were not. I dreamed of a library full of candles and a woman with red hair arguing with someone across a heavy wooden table, certain she was right, completely refusing to soften the argument for politeness. I dreamed of a field at harvest time and a woman with red hair and gray eyes moving through it with a basket, and stopping to look at the mountains in the distance with the specific look of someone calculating how far they would have to travel and already deciding they were going. I dreamed of a market very like the market where I had first seen him, and a woman with red hair bargaining for silk with an efficiency that left the merchant slightly stunned. I dreamed of a classroom, and a woman standing at the front of it speaking to children who were listening with the kind of attention that meant they would remember what she said. I dreamed of the sea. And in every dream at the edge of the scene just visible there was a figure, fair skin, white hair, blue eyes watching. Always the same distance, always the same quality of attention, always there. I woke from these dreams feeling things that were not quite my feelings, grief that was not my grief, gratitude that was larger than any gratitude I had personally accumulated in 23 years. A specific ache that I understood was the ache of living well and being loved, and then leaving someone behind who would stay. I told him about the dreams. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said he had not known they could do that the soul could carry something across, that some part of all of them might still be there. His voice when he said it was careful in the way he was careful when something mattered more than usual. I thought about all of them, the scholar and the farmer's daughter and the merchant and the teacher and the weaver and the woman who went to sea, all of them in me somehow, all of them watching him from the other side of 4 centuries of memory that was not quite mine but was not quite not mine either. I thought about the ache I felt in the dreams when the scene ended, when the version of me who was not me had to leave and he had to stay. I did not want to leave him. I did not know yet if that was my feeling or theirs. I thought probably it was both. He came to the studio on a Tuesday evening in December and stood at the window for a long time looking at the street before he sat down. I had learned to read his silences. There were different kinds, the comfortable ones that meant he was simply present, the focused ones that meant he was watching something. This one was different. This one had a quality of preparation in it, the silence of someone who has decided to say something they have never said and is making sure of themselves before they begin. I put down what I was working on and waited. He said he had something to tell me that he had not told any of the others, that he had not told them because he had not understood it himself until recently. That understanding it had taken him 400 years, which he recognized was a long time even by his standards. He said that when the scholar died he had grieved, when the farmer's daughter died he had grieved, when all of them died he had grieved, he had always grieved. That was not the thing he had not understood. The thing he had not understood was what the grief was made of. He had thought for 400 years that the grief was the grief of a guardian losing a charge, of a protector losing the person they protected. That was a real grief. He had not been wrong that it was real. But it was not all of it. The rest of it, the part he had not let himself understand, because understanding it would have made the oath unbearable, was that he had loved each of them in a way that had nothing to do with the oath and everything to do with who they were, not the soul in the abstract. The specific person, the way the scholar's certainty had made him want to argue back and then realize she was right, the way the woman who went to sea had stood at the bow of the ship and laughed into the wind and made 400 years of watching worth every moment. He said the grief had been so large after each of them because he had loved them the way you love someone you chose, not someone you were given. He said he had spent 400 years loving people he was not allowed to love as more than a guardian because the oath required distance, and distance was the only thing that had made it possible to go on after each loss. He said standing at the back of every room for 4 centuries had been the only way to survive loving people who were always going to leave him behind. I sat very still and listened to all of it. Then I said that I was not going to ask him to love me from a distance. He looked at me. I said that I understood the oath and I understood the grief and I understood why distance had been the only answer for 4 centuries, and I said that I was the one in front of him now, not the scholar or the farmer's daughter or the woman who went to sea, me, and I was asking him directly to stop keeping the distance. He was very still for a long moment. Then he reached across and took my face in both hands the way you hold something that has always mattered and has finally stopped being something you are only allowed to protect from a distance. I put my hands over his. I thought about all the versions of me that had lived and died without knowing he was there. I thought about the ache in the dreams. I thought about the warm, quiet, watchful presence I had felt my whole life. I was glad to be the one who got to know. He moved into the building across from mine in January. Not because he needed to be closer to guard me. The distance he had always kept had been more than sufficient for that. He moved in because I suggested it, and because he said yes immediately, which was the fastest he had ever agreed to anything, and because we had both decided that 400 years of distance was enough. He learned the city the way he learned everything, thoroughly. He knew the names of the people in my street within a week. He knew which bakery was best and which market stalls were honest, and which river path was quietest in the morning and which was loudest in the afternoon. He walked through the world with the specific attention of someone who had always paid attention and now had permission to do so for his own sake rather than only for mine. He came to the studio most days, not to watch me from across the street, to sit at the table in the corner and read or simply be present while I worked. We talked while I worked, about the dreams and what they told us, about the other versions of me and what he remembered of them, about what it meant to be the one who finally knew. I asked him once if it was strange, being with me knowing everything he knew, knowing all of them and carrying that alongside knowing me. He thought about it the way he thought about serious things, carefully and completely. Then he said that it was not strange in the way I meant, that knowing all of them had not made knowing me smaller, that if anything each of them had taught him something that made him better at being present with the next one, and so by the time he reached me, he had 400 years of practice at paying attention to exactly this kind of person. I laughed. He looked at me with the expression I had come to love most on him, the expression of someone who has made someone laugh and finds it still slightly surprising and very worth it. I taught him to make things with clay. He was methodical and precise, and took it very seriously and produced vessels that were technically correct and completely without spontaneity. I told him this. He considered it for a moment, and then tried again with considerably less precision and considerably more feeling, and produced something genuinely beautiful. He said that was what happened when you spent 400 years doing things correctly from the correct distance. You had to learn the other way later. We were both learning the other ways. I asked him about the oath in March. We had not talked about it directly since the beginning. It had been there between us the whole time, the shape of 400 years of it visible in everything he did and everything he was. But I had not asked him what it meant now, what it meant for the future. He told me the oath lasted as long as the line lasted, as long as there was someone in the line to guard the oath continued. When the line ended, the oath was fulfilled. It had been designed to end eventually. Most oaths were. I asked him what happened when the oath ended. He said he was free, that was the word, free, to do whatever an elf who had been a guardian for 4 centuries did when the guardianship was finished. I asked him what he wanted to do. He looked at me for a long time, the blue eyes that had watched 7 generations of me live and die, and had watched each of them from the careful distance that the oath required, and had grieved each of them with a grief that he had only recently been honest with himself about. He said he wanted to stay. Not as a guardian, not at the back of the room, just stay, in the city, in the building across from mine, at the table in the corner of the studio, present in all the ways he had not been allowed to be present for 400 years. I thought about the fact that I was going to grow old, that I was human, and the years would take me the way they had taken all the others, that he would outlive me the way he had outlived all of them, that the grief would come again the way it had always come. I asked him if he had thought about that. He said he had thought about nothing else since November. He said that he had spent 400 years protecting himself from that grief by keeping his distance, and that it had not worked, that the distance had not made the grief smaller. It had only made the time before the grief smaller, less of it, less real. He said he would rather have all of it, all the real time, all the closeness, all the ordinary days and the difficult ones and the ones that were nothing special and were everything because of that. He would rather have all of it and then carry the grief at full weight when it came than spend whatever time we had protecting himself from a loss he was going to feel anyway. I looked at him in the March light coming through the studio window. I thought about all of them, the scholar and the farmer's daughter and the merchant and the teacher and the weaver and the woman who went to sea, all of them loved by him from a careful distance, all of them felt, all of them grieved. I thought about being the one he did not love from a distance. I reached across and took his hand. He held it the way he had held it since December, like something he chose, not something the oath required. It is autumn again, 1 year since the market, 1 year since a stranger with white hair and blue eyes looked at me across a crowd with the expression of someone seeing something they had been looking for a very long time. The dreams have not stopped. I do not want them to stop. they feel like company now, like being part of something that is larger than one life. 7 versions of the same soul, all of them present in me in some way I cannot fully articulate but can feel. The scholar's certainty. The farmer's daughter's willingness to go wherever she was needed, the merchant's precision, the teacher's patience, the weaver's hands that always needed to be making something, the woman who looked at the sea like it was a beginning rather than an edge. All of them in me, all of them glad, in some way I feel rather than know, that this time was different, that this time she walked toward him instead of being watched from a careful distance until she was gone. Eiran is at the studio. He is at the table in the corner reading something about the history of ceramics because he decided to understand what I do properly, and this is how he understands things. Thoroughly. He has been reading about ceramics for 3 months. He knows more about the history of pottery than I do. He told me a fact about ancient glazing techniques last week that I did not know and was genuinely interesting. I did not tell him that. He does not need the encouragement. He looks up from the book and finds me looking at him. He does this. Looks up at exactly the right moment, as if some sense he has honed over 4 centuries of watching tells him when he is being watched in return. He does not look away. He holds my gaze with those blue eyes that have watched me through 7 lifetimes and are looking at me now without any of the distance, without the careful remove, without the practiced restraint of 400 years of an oath. Just looking at me, present, here, chosen. I think about the feeling I have had my whole life, the warm, quiet, watchful presence at the edge of my awareness. The thing I mentioned to my mother when I was small, and she said was imagination. The thing I mentioned to a friend at 15, and she said was drama. It was him, it was always him, standing at the back of every room I had ever been in this life and all the ones before it, making sure I was safe. I am still safe, but now I know whose safety it is, and now he is not at the back of the room. He is right here. And after 400 years of waiting for this, that is enough. That is everything.